Welcome to this event, which is part of the 9th Annual Four Corners Festival. The aim of the festival has always been to connect people from across the city of Belfast and beyond, to encourage us out of our own corners to encounter new perspectives, new ideas and new friends. While we can't do that in person this year, we offer you a programme that we hope will inspire you, take you virtually to new areas of this wonderful city, and allow us all to connect and exchange ideas on a whole range of topics. Our theme this year is breathe. In Hebrew, the word ruach means breath or spirit, the essence of life. Our 2021 festival seeks to tap into that spirit and breathe hope into our city, fostering creativity and resilience as we respond to the challenges of the pandemic and the realities of everyday life, to offer a breathing space. Yet, in the context of COVID-19, we've all become very conscious that what we breathe out and breathe in can be as much a potential threat as a source and sign of life. The virus itself affects our breathing, and some of the measures taken to slow down transmission have had a disproportionately negative effect on those who are already vulnerable. That includes those who have found themselves living for prolonged periods in increasingly abusive environments. We want the Four Corners Festival to be a breathing space for people and ideas, a place where painful experiences can be aired in a safe environment. Throughout the festival, we explore the importance of embodied breath as a significant component of good mental health and resilience. We explore how this intersects with ancient spiritual practices and prayer. We hope to offer tools that can help the most vulnerable and those who work with them, and point people in the direction of appropriate support. All the events in our Four Corners programme are free to attend. We'd love you to support us by attending events and sharing them with your friends. You can also support us financially now or throughout the year by visiting fourcornersfestival.com/donate to make a donation. We'd also like to thank those who have supported us in the past, our existing friends of the festival, and our funders who have enabled the 2021 festival to take place. Your support is invaluable. We hope you enjoy this event and engage with the challenges it will bring to us. Although we can't give you a feedback form in your hand this year, we still need to gather your feedback. So please take a minute to visit fourcornersfestival.com/survey and fill out the simple form. It makes such a difference with our funders. Thank you.
5 women have been killed since the first lockdown in March 2020 because of domestic abuse in Northern Ireland. Whether you know it or not, it's very likely someone you care about, a friend, colleague, relative or neighbour, is suffering and scared right now because of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse isn't a new problem, but coronavirus has highlighted new and existing risks. Hello and welcome to Breath Knocked Out of Me, a Four Corners Festival panel discussion about domestic abuse. I am your host, Nicky Cahill. Talking about domestic abuse matters because it breaks the silence that surrounds it. Before we join our panel of experts, I spoke with Judith Thompson, Naomi Long, and John Devaney. Judith spoke to me about the context of Northern Ireland as a society emerging from conflict and what that means for domestic abuse.
I started off life as a social worker and a probation officer in Manchester in the mid-1980s. Wind forward a few months and I'm in Belfast, talking to women in similar situations. So the Troubles didn't cause domestic violence and domestic abuse. Those women, because it was mostly women that I talked to in Belfast, they had extra obstacles. There were extra things they had to deal with. So I talked to a lady who'd on different occasions had every single bone in her face broken by her partner. She couldn't go to the police. Where she lived, had she gone to the police, she would have been afraid she'd been thought to be an informer. And that would have given her a whole other level of danger to deal with. And to be honest, if the police had tried to respond to her in that situation, they would have been very conscious of her situation, as well as conscious of their own personal safety. You know, in the mid-80s, there were communities in Northern Ireland where access to sanctuary, to support, and to justice, and to the justice system, just wasn't there. There were many people in Northern Ireland at that time who lived in homes where a firearm was present. Legally, a lot of legally held firearms, and in some cases not legally. But the whole dynamic of a domestic abusive situation, when the person perpetrating the abuse has access to a firearm, it makes the victim more powerless, it makes the situation more dangerous and more threatening. It adds a layer to it, which was a direct consequence of the Troubles at that time. How far the expectation that a measure of violence was part of life. Talking to girls who at the ages of 14 and 15 would say, you know, obviously they knew people like that lady who had had bones broken. And they didn't think that was all right. But they did think it was okay to get slapped once in a while. And they used that kind of language, and it was part of an expectation. So I think there was a question about whether community attitudes around gender and relationships may have changed more slowly. You were talking then, and I believe, Nicky, you're talking now, about a place where trauma and all the things that go with it in terms of mental health, in terms of substance misuse, and I mean prescribed substances and alcohol, as well sometimes as non-prescribed substance misuse. Those things are a part of life. They don't on their own cause domestic abuse, but they do aggravate the dangerousness and the volatility of the situation that a victim finds themselves in. And those things, those are still a reality today in Northern Ireland, Nicky. They're still a reality through generations that have suffered trauma. I believe that the ability of the justice system and policing and other organisations to reach out and understand and engage with domestic abuse has changed hugely. If you live in a household today where a person is abusive and has access to a firearm, and that is still at a higher level here in Northern Ireland than it would be, for example, in Manchester or other parts of the UK, you know, that still adds a layer. There's a loyalty to a cause or an identity or an organisation that can make it hard for individuals and families to reach out and say, look, we've got a problem here. Domestic abuse happens with or without the presence of conflict like we've had. But I do think that if you are in an abusive situation, there were things about the conflict which made it harder to reach out, which made that situation more volatile.
The Domestic Abuse Bill in January 2021 went through the Northern Ireland Assembly. I spoke to Naomi Long, Minister for Justice.
The key message in this bill that we want to set out for people is that this is something that can happen to anyone, irrespective of age, irrespective of status or employment, irrespective of gender or sexual orientation or any of those things, irrespective of race, cultural identity, religion. These domestic abuse, anyone can be a victim, and indeed anyone can be a perpetrator. And so what we want to do is remove, first of all, some of the mythology around domestic abuse, but we also want to try and remove the stigma, because there is no shame in being an abuse victim. It is nothing that you have done or not done that has led to you being targeted in that way. And so you shouldn't be ashamed if you've been abused by a partner. The only shame is on those who are responsible for this kind of abuse, the perpetrators. There's no shame in being a victim and a survivor of domestic abuse. There are thousands of men and women across Northern Ireland who wake up every morning feeling frightened, feeling controlled, isolated, and degraded or humiliated or ashamed in their own homes. And that is a situation that I don't think is tolerable. I think the difference that it will make is that many of the behaviours that previously fell under the bar of criminal activity will now be able to be picked up. It will allow the police to take action when it comes to coercive control and those sorts of courses of behaviour that people are subjected to. It's also allowed us around the issue of children to introduce an Operation Encompass model. So it's given us the powers to do that. And that will allow the police to share information, certain categories of information with educators, so that if a child goes to school the following day after there's been a police call out to the home on a domestic abuse incident, the police will be in a position to speak with the school and let them know what's been happening at home the night before. And then we've also, as you know, made some changes to the legal aid plans for Northern Ireland that will allow those who are respondents in family cases whose partners have been previously accused of domestic abuse and who are at risk of domestic abuse. It will allow them to access legal aid, because we know that one of the sad things is that there are those abusers who will use the court system as a way to again exert control over a partner who no longer wants that contact. And it's not just as simple as saying, well, you need to tell someone, but that they will be listened to, they will be believed, they will be heard, and that the law will have their back. And for those who are still in abusive relationships at the moment, my appeal to them is to come forward and to speak to someone. There's a 24-hour sexual abuse and domestic abuse helpline. I would encourage people to pick up the phone and speak to someone who will be able to give them proper counselling and advice, be able to signpost them to the services needed, and most of all, find the courage to leave that relationship behind and put your own needs first. Because unfortunately, you know, as a result of domestic abuse, many people who are in that situation don't feel that they're worth the effort. You know, just because this happens behind closed doors doesn't make it private. It's not a private matter. You're not being nosy if you take an interest where you think that somebody is being abused, where you think that there is something seriously wrong. And I would encourage people to have the courage to report it in the way you would any other crime, because you could save a life in doing that, and you could certainly ensure that somebody's life takes a turn for the better. So I would just encourage people to make that first step and make the call. And I think when you do that, then it's up to us to make sure that the response you get is one that actually gives you the support and encouragement you need to be able to move on.
Professor John Devaney spoke to me about the impact of domestic abuse on children.
What the research says overall is that the majority of children tend to be impacted. They tend to be left feeling confused in the short term about whether family is a safe place for them to be, and also questioning their relationship with one or both parents as a result of what they're going through. Older children tend to be worried about their younger siblings and want to try and protect them from what's going on in the household. And what we see is that for younger children, they tend to then engage in behaviours which are about withdrawing into themselves and possibly trying to distract themselves from what might be going on within the family situation, whereas older children may be looking for opportunities to try and escape from the family and to try and find other diversions. Situations where there may be a lot of violence used at home, and children can be very fearful about their own safety and the safety of both their siblings and also their parent who's on the receiving end of that violence. And alongside of that, we also have other situations where there may be less violence, but parents and children are living in fear and feel as though they're very controlled. And in those sorts of situations, children might feel as though they have very little opportunity to start to express themselves or to be able to even form relationships, such as friendships, outside of the family home, because actually they can't really invite friends to come and spend time with them. They feel this is something which is only happening to them and something which is shameful and that they shouldn't talk about. So I think the key message is to try and create the opportunity for children to be able to speak about what's going on at home, not to get their parents into trouble, but it's a way of sharing their worries and getting support around these difficult issues. Leaving may be seen as a simple and straightforward solution by some of us on the outside, but they know it's actually very dangerous and very complicated to be thinking of leaving. So staying may not be an easy choice, but maybe the one that they feel is the safest for them and their children. But I think in those situations, one of the things that we've found can be most helpful is trying to break the silence around domestic violence so that those who are being victimized have support, and that they know there are other people who are alert to their situation, and in turn then their children can receive support as well. We know from really good research that's been done now internationally and locally that actually most children who grow up in households where there's domestic violence, those children grow up to have very productive adult relationships. It's not to say that it's been easy. It's not to say that they still don't have the legacy of what they've been through as children. But for many of those children, they go on to actually be to have relationships which are very fulfilling, and if they have their own children, to be really very good parents to their own children. The difference seems to be that they get help at as early an opportunity as possible. The NSPCC Childline service isn't just a phone-based service anymore, it's also text-based, it's also web-based. So there is the opportunity for those children who have access to digital tools, whether it's a phone or whether it's a laptop or a tablet, to actually make contact with a trusted organisation that has skilled counsellors at which they can talk about what's going on. And even if it's just creating a safety plan in the short term until they're back at school again, to at least feel as though they're able to reach out and get some support and help. And of course, those services are also very good at being able to ask children very sensitive questions which differentiate between those situations whereby it may not be ideal, but a child's not in imminent danger, from a situation where actually social workers or the police need to be notified because actually a child is in imminent danger.
I was joined on the panel by Dr Olive Buckley, OBE, a family GP and forensic medical doctor at the Rowan Regional Sexual Assault Referral Centre, Detective Chief Inspector Lindsay Fisher from the Public Protection Branch of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and the Rev Alan Lorimer, a chartered psychologist and Methodist minister who works with survivors of domestic abuse as they try to rebuild their lives. Our discussion opened by trying to understand what exactly is domestic abuse.
Well, I would go straight to Women's Aid to get my definition of domestic abuse, and it is something that's intentional and persistent, and it's the misuse of power. Completely, power and control are major parts of what I consider to be domestic abuse.
Yeah, well, I suppose, we tend maybe to think of domestic abuse as being just within a relationship. The definition that I like is that, domestic abuse, it can either be one incident or it can be a pattern of incidents of controlling, threatening behaviour or abuse, including sexual abuse by a partner or an ex-partner or within the extended family. So, I think domestic violence has got a larger umbrella, and then there's the intimate partner abuse, which I think is what we tend to think of. But certainly, domestic abuse can impact on all the family, and all members of the family can be affected.
I think I would certainly agree with that, Olive, and in terms of domestic abuse, certainly from a police perspective, we are seeing all connotations of that in terms of our victims and also the perpetrators, whether that is a sibling abusive behaviour or whether that is intimate partners or parent and sibling. We are seeing all of those different relationships come under the microscope in terms of domestic abuse. The startling statistic that has been sort of quoted over the last number of years, really, that before somebody picks up the phone to report domestic abuse to police, that they've perhaps been a victim up to 35 times. That's a startling amount of abuse, controlling behaviour that any one victim has experienced before finding their voice, finding the strength and the opportunity to reach out to police. We're saying in excess of 32,000 calls to police each year. Over half of those end up in recorded crimes. So the statistics are startling in terms of the amount of people that are suffering domestic abuse.
Olive, domestic abuse has historically been seen as a women's issue. Have things changed?
It's much more difficult for men to disclose domestic violence. And the support is it's a bit of a postcode lottery, and there's less support and there's more stigma attached to it. But I think it does have to be said that it is a crime that predominantly does affect women. 90% of what's going through the court system, are females, and the vast majority of the perpetrators are male. But yes, domestic violence and sexual violence can also affect males as well.
Can you tell us a little bit more from your experience about the sort of people that do suffer from domestic abuse? Is it one particular group?
No, I think it just covers all of society. I've people from all classes, whether they've got church background or no church background, men and women. Now, I haven't dealt with anybody from the LGBTQI community, but I'm aware that there's also abuse goes on within relationships in that community. But I say it's not any particular person. I mean, it comes from working class areas, middle class areas a lot. I suppose like men can suffer the exact same, the areas that Olive and Lindsay have referred to, in terms of they can also suffer financial abuse, they can suffer physical abuse, they can suffer from psychological abuse, especially humiliation and things like that. I think the abuse itself is the same for all people, but in terms of recovery, from a psychological perspective, it's just bespoke to the person. Each person brings their own history as well, and I would be trying to help people go beyond just being a victim or a survivor, but to thrive.
Domestic abuse in the public consciousness is synonymous with violence, yet there are other forms.
Domestic abuse has got many faces, and certainly it's it's a very powerful way to control somebody financially by limiting the money that they have to spend in the house, not allowing them to buy things for themselves, giving not enough money for petrol or just for the minimum journey, looking at how many miles they have been in the car. And it's a very powerful way to make somebody stay with you if they feel that they can't manage without you. But as I said, it's got many different faces. And, in my lifetime now, I'm working as a doctor for 35 years. And, I have unfortunately seen the complete spectrum from people being murdered to being seriously ill in intensive care, to major injuries, more minor injuries. But it's much more subtle than that. Frequently, on a virtually daily basis, I would have women who would present saying, I'm fat and ugly. My husband says I am. Could I have diet pills, please? Or they usually ask for diet pills, and when you explore it, it's because they've been told that they're fat and ugly, and they're afraid that their partner will leave them. Or also a very common one is decreased libido. Could I have something for my sex drive? My husband has sent me down to get us sorted out, and if it's not sorted out, he's going to leave me. To I'm low confidence, low self-esteem, And they feel that the problem is all with them, and what their partner is telling them is right, and that actually is not correct. They're being told this by a bully and somebody who is committing domestic abuse and sexual abuse on that person. And the problem really is, in the first instance, is to get women to be able to self-identify with that.
There's so many different experiences, as we've referred to. Domestic abuse can happen to anyone, but I think specifically thinking about the typical role of a man in a relationship, in a home, is that of provider, the strong person. To have that confidence taken away, to have that humiliation. There are some that will talk to support services, MAP or MAN, and have said that they would rather take their own lives than identify as a victim of domestic abuse. And that, to me, that anyone feels that way, it is horrific. And the experiences for men, whether that's at the hands of a male or female partner, they are slightly different. The offences committed against them can be slightly nuanced, again, because of that stigma really around talking about domestic abuse that men typically feel. So the offences can be different, and the experiences again are slightly different, and they will be from relationship to relationship as well, depending on their age, depending on their partner, what support services they have. But that particular message about taking their own life rather than telling somebody that they're a victim it sticks in my mind, as something that we really want to move away from. We want to shine a light on everybody's victim journey.
I think abuse is abuse, whether through on all the various behavioural forms that we see, whether it's physical abuse, psychological abuse, emotional, spiritual abuse, cultural abuse, control. It's all about control, and I'm sure that there are relationships within the LGBTQ community who suffer similarly.
What's the experience of domestic abuse like in the LGBTQI plus community?
I think that the big thing that's coming to me from partners is around the messaging that members of LGBTQ plus don't see themselves in the domestic abuse messaging that's out there, because it is aimed very gender specific, and that, I suppose, typical stereotypical relationship.
We would see particularly a lot of males who are in the same-sex relationship who will come as a self-referrer to their own. That means that they don't report to the police, but they refer directly to their own, and they can access all the services. So they can have the forensic samples taken and stored for up to 2 years. If they are not in a position, as Lindsay has said, perhaps they haven't come out or have other barriers to reporting, they have got up to 2 years for the forensic specimens to be used, should they wish to proceed down the criminal justice system. But also they can access of health therapeutic services. Particularly, there's medication that prevents HIV that has, a very good result in reducing the impact of males getting HIV, but it must be given within 72 hours. And as well, follow up with all the sexually transmitted infections and the support and signposting, throughout their experience.
And I think the most important thing for LGBTQ people who are maybe experiencing abusive relationships, or at the risk of experiencing abusive relationships, or have previously experienced abusive relationships, to know that you're not alone, to know that you're not the only person from our community who has experienced this form of violence and abuse, to know that there'll be no judgment if you come to talk or access help and support through the Rainbow Project or any of our other partner organizations in the sector. And just know that we're here if there's ever anything that you want to talk about, or if you need support in accessing a refuge or navigating through the criminal justice system to report domestic abuse. There are then those kind of particular experiences for LGBTQ people, particularly around the issue of being out. So if one partner in a relationship is out and the other partner isn't, that can be something that an abusive partner holds over the partner who isn't out. They can use that piece of information that they have about their partner against them. If you do anything, I'm going to out you to your employer, I'm going to out you to your family, and the fear of the repercussions of what that can mean for that person can prevent them from doing anything about being in an abusive relationship. And I think particularly for trans people, and particularly trans women's experiences of domestic abuse, that can manifest itself in terms of sexual violence, and then those experiences of sexual violence can make it really difficult for trans women to know what they're supposed to do with those experiences. Where are the organizations that they can go to for support? Where LGBTQ people feel isolated, so they feel like they're dealing with this on their own without a societal safety net there to support them, but also that they're feeling invisible, in that our kind of societal cultural conversations around domestic abuse tend not to include the experiences of LGBTQ people, and that makes them invisible to policymakers, invisible to service providers, and also invisible to organizations like ourselves as well. The police understand that there are issues of domestic abuse in LGBTQ relationships, and if you are not safe, if your partner poses a risk to your life or your health, please contact the police. If you don't feel able to contact the police, you can contact the Rainbow Project Advocacy Service.
Safe Ireland and film director Marion Bergen have produced a short film called Woman and Child about coercive control. Let's watch the film.
My love. Words fail me. I long to hold you tight and have you to myself. You're my first thought in the morning, and I need you more than life. You belong to me and take my pain away. In your eyes, I see my soul reflected. My heart beats fast, a madness, an obsession. I'm addicted. I wish you loved yourself as much as I do. And your flaws make me love you more. I'll never let you go. Mine forever. P.S. I think you're beautiful.
I would say that in terms of intimidation and just being belittled and being humiliated, that's coercive control, where a person is made to feel less than they are and not treated with total respect.
I suppose in terms of coercive control, as Alan said, it's the feel, it's the humiliation, it's the continual belittling and the impact that has and the build-up that has, and certainly from my experience in terms of building the police training package, what victims are saying is that this has such an impact on them that they don't know when that's coming, whereas they can see and feel when the crescendo is coming in terms of violence. But this puts them even more on eggshells because it's that continual behaviour.
If you or someone you know have been affected by the issues raised in this programme, there is help available. Contact the 24-hour domestic and sexual abuse helpline by telephoning 0808 802 1414, or in an emergency where you need immediate assistance or feel threatened, call the police. We'll hear now from a woman who shared her story with me, but asked to remain anonymous because of the risk to her life. Her story is voiced by an actor.
Hope HOPE. That's what I want you to know. There is hope, and there is healing for you, the abundance of amazing grace. Write the word hope somewhere you will see it, and breathe it in. The hope that today won't always be, and tomorrow has new miracles, that a new day will come. I also want you to know we don't have to hide our hurts under our hallelujahs or pretend to perfection that everything is okay. My past, its pain, is not the definition of who I am, just like yours isn't either. You are you, not who they tell you are. And lastly, well, I want you to know I'm just like you, a regular person, doing all those normal things each of us do. What changed? Well, that's a good question. Another one I'm often asked is, why did you stay? You're an educated woman. Those are questions I ask myself too. For a while they crashed like cymbals in a marching band, round and round and round, until I thought I would die in the din. However, I've learnt not to live in that space of coulda, shoulda, woulda. It isn't healthy for me, nor for you. Maybe I'll never know the answers, no matter how much the questions rankle. It could have been my disbelief that it was happening to me, was actually happening to me. Or the thought, I'm an educated woman, I'm strong enough to love this person back to wholeness. My belief that it was my job to rescue. Before I left, when I stayed, I know that I was downright petrified, cloaked in humiliation, sawed in guilt, and squashed under the weight of condemnation. Holding my breath, thinking if only I can be better, do better, then everything will be better. Yet it never was, and we can't live holding our breath forever. Battered, bloodied, bruised, suffocated in shame. I wanted to believe them when they told me they were sorry, and it would never happen again. After all, they were my lover, my partner, my spouse, my co-parent to our children. I loved them. At the same time, they were my jailer, my keeper, my executioner. And it did happen, and it did happen, and it did happen again and again. A cycle of lies and denial, ghosting and gaslighting, the toxic ingredients of manipulation and control. Their clouds of lies swarmed me like a thicket of flies. Their piercing poison left me mystified. So, I can't answer your question. I don't know if I ever will. All I can say is I did until I didn't. I had a crumb of courage that wouldn't let me sweep it away. And then just like that, I knew I could not stay. So I left. That's all that matters, that I left and that I'm alive. And I want you to leave too. That tiny crumb of courage, the teeny weeny little speck was my mustard seed of hope. Look for your crumb of courage because you have it too. Hold on to the light of your desire to live, no matter how softly it flickers inside you. There is a light in the darkness, and the darkness has not and cannot overcome it. Walk towards the light and let your crumb of courage grow.
The fear of disclosure and the loss of control when they do disclose. Like the lady, in the film, who's been managing the situation for 7 years. She knows that perpetrator. She knows what the boundaries are, and she has managed to keep herself safe within that relationship. And that would be a recurrent theme, really, is, people who are trying to manage, to manage the situation until they can be empowered to leave.
When you say she'd managed to keep herself safe, Olive, surely she wasn't safe if she was being domestically abused.
Well, she wasn't murdered, and her children weren't murdered. And quite often, even in relationships, particularly with the coercive control, where there is no physical violence. The most dangerous time when a woman leaves a relationship is in the first month, particularly the first year, for domestic homicide. And often these women have not, have physically not been abused, but, have been emotionally, sexually, and financially and psychologically abused.
Alan, what stops someone from leaving a relationship where domestic violence is present?
Well, suppose for a variety, initially I would say that it's, as has been said earlier on, they actually are with this person because they love them and they have loved them and they had some idea about them. There's the children element of it as well, but also from a psychological point of view, which I will speak to in terms of the victim, they themselves have started to internalize and blame themselves and shame themselves and think there's something wrong that they're doing. And over a period of time, a drip of constant belittling and constantly blaming someone leads them to internalize this, and they believe that it's something to do with them. So there's that, and also to the financial controls and all the other things that can stop the person from trying to get away from it, as well as, I suppose, various religious elements to that as well.
It's very different for each individual, but what I would say is that sometimes it's the fear of facing their perpetrator in court. And what I would say is for our victims, there are so many different mechanisms that we can provide support and ask for the court to provide support around that. But I suppose it is also that victims want the abuse to stop. They maybe don't see that a criminal justice outcome is what they want. They maybe don't want to see their partner, or in circumstances their child, serving a sentence, serving a custodial sentence, having a caution against their name or other criminal justice outcomes. So I think that, and the guilt, I suppose, that comes alongside that can also have an impact on what they want to see as the outcome.
It's a very, very difficult thing. We just think that when someone says, I would report this and say this, that they can just leave easily. Mm-hmm. There's still this bond there, and that's the problem. There's a deep love and care, but it's also been squashed out of someone, their own ability to see their own well-being.
Lindsay, what is domestic homicide?
This is a murder that has happened in the family setting. We again look to the intimate partner, but that could be a much wider definition in terms of the family dynamic, whether that is a grown-up child, whether that is a parent, or a wider guardianship in terms of the family setting. We have only recently introduced domestic homicide reviews in December 2020, working alongside the Department of Justice. We are seeing a number of homicides, 5 in the last year. So this is something that is happening in a domestic setting, but it isn't always an intimate partner relationship or an ex-intimate partner relationship.
Alan, what about those who are left behind after a domestic homicide? Would you say they're victims as well of domestic abuse?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you're left with all the memory and the experience of the abuse, and also the death itself being carried out by a loved one. It's going to have tremendous psychological impact on people who observe that and who are part of it. Very much so.
While it should be noted, escaping domestic abuse is specifically listed by the government as one of a handful of reasonable excuses for leaving home during the latest lockdown. Agencies that support victims say that there is no doubt lockdown has made life more dangerous for victims. I spoke to Sonia McMullen from the Women's Aid Federation in Northern Ireland. She starts by telling me how grave the situation is and what we need to do to help children.
If we look at our statistics here, it shows that it's a pandemic in itself, domestic violence. We've had 5 women murdered in the last year. That's how serious this problem is here. But most people think of physical abuse and they think of a black eye. They think of that bruise and the physical assault. The emotional and verbal abuse that is undertaken by many, many perpetrators of domestic violence can be calculating, and people talk about losing their whole sense of self. And the impact of that can lead to eating disorders, to alcohol and drug, addictions. It can lead to severe levels of anxiety and poor mental health, insomnia, unexplained somatic symptoms, and the list goes on and on and on of the effects. But there's not one person I've spoken to over my years in Women's Aid who doesn't lose their whole sense of self. And that's a huge, big thing within living in a home where there is domestic violence. A lot of children don't grow up in a house where there is a healthy relationship. Look at our figures. If you look at 1 in 4 women experiencing domestic violence, there's many, many homes in Northern Ireland where there is children and young people growing up within this, and the impact is great. Giving our children the tools they need to articulate, to feel that they're safe, to be able to have a feelings vocabulary, to be able to talk about what's happening for them. And it's really concerning now we're in this lockdown again, because for many people, being pushed into this social isolation is a dream for a perpetrator of domestic violence, because if we look at those coercive and controlling behaviours, social isolation is so high up there. In relation to our new legislation, there's a child aggravator within that as well, which is quite unique. We're the only part of the UK. And that's really taken into consideration the impact that domestic violence and abuse has on that child or young person, even though they don't have to be present in the same room, or they don't have to witness that abuse, but just being in a home where that is happening, the damage to them is recognised. There has to be hope. And the sooner, a person is believed, they tell their story, they're accepted, they're acknowledged, they're believed, the sooner their pathway to support begins. We have many different levels of support. The most common, I suppose, that's known to a lot of people would be our refuge and emergency accommodation. So if someone is in crisis and there's been an incident, they could come through the police, social services, they could make a self-referral themselves. And that would be going to one of our refuges. We've 8 local women's aid groups across Northern Ireland, providing emergency accommodation. We also have group work, which is really good. We have Journey to Freedom, My Life, My Choices, New Beginnings. And as the name say, it is about moving on. And it's those links and that peer support that people get through group work is very, very powerful. And we're all about rebalancing that power to give it back to that individual as well. We have lots of education programs and children and young people's workers that work in a one-to-one and do group work with children and young people as well, but they also go into schools and talk to children too as well, like a school counsellor kind of role as well, and that's paramount. We also have court support. Court can be really daunting for anyone who attends it, and it could be family proceedings, it could, child contact, it could be divorce proceedings, you could be going for an emergency order, you could be up, as a witness in the criminal court, whatever that may be. And Women's Aid can provide that support and a cup of tea and someone to sit. Some people don't even have a space to be able to go and make a phone call, and that's a reality. So web-based support is something that we started during lockdown as well. And the web chat is proven to be really successful too, as a safe form of communication. Women's Aid is here, we're open, and we are available across the whole of Northern Ireland, and we really are in a very privileged position where people come forward and tell us their story, and then we are able to put whatever support that may be in place, whether it is emergency accommodation or whether it's that staying in your own home and supporting you and your family, whatever it may be, we will look and we will be able to support you.
Well, usually I see people and they've come from Women's Aid or Nexus or some other group, or they've been referred to me that way, and they've come through the difficult phase, and they're probably more at the survivor stage. And I'm really there to try and, if they're suffering from, say, some trauma that's still there, there are some people I have dealt with who have had really post-traumatic stress disorder from various continuous abuse, especially physical abuse and psychological abuse, of belittling the person. But I would try and build them up slowly. It wouldn't be we work together. And the one thing I would say is, and especially looking at it from women who have been suffered from a domestic abuse, I'd be there to try and build and empower them in the sense of that they make the choices, and that's a very difficult thing. They've lost their voice. They've forgotten what they like and who they are. And I'm talking about some people who have suffered this for many years, and it's about building that up again.
Domestic abuse has also been called the shadow pandemic by the UN.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is something that police have been very conscious of during the last 9 to 12 months. What we would say throughout the pandemic, it is absolutely vital that we are still here. We are still here to support victims, no matter how you reach out.
And I think it's important as well to say that the other services are still there. Women's Aid, whilst they, the mode may have changed and that it may be more web or, more on the internet, the service is still there. And, the hostel accommodation and all, all is working in a different way, but everything is working as normal. And also with your GP, it's more difficult due to the risk of COVID to have a face-to-face with your GP. But on the other side, you now don't have to wait, 2 to 6 weeks to get an appointment with your GP. If you ring your GP, that is dealt with, if not same day, within a couple of days.
Well, I've had clients over the break, and I've been meeting them on Zoom. So I've been trying to provide the same service that I provided face-to-face since March. And I have to say I've had more clients with domestic abuse coming to me, especially after July online, than I would have normally had.
Police have often been seen as an organisation that say, oh, it's a domestic, we can't go there. That there's that perception out there that there isn't actually help available. Absolutely.
Anytime a member of the public, whoever or wherever they are, pick up the phone to police or report, and however they do, they will get a response. They will get police attending if that is what they want and if that's what they need immediately. So if they are in immediate danger, then absolutely that will secure an emergency response.
What is immediate danger?
I suppose from a police perspective, that is something that is ongoing. So where we are maybe receiving a call or even a call that the line drops and we don't hear anyone talking, so that the phone has maybe been snatched away and we can hear a disturbance, we can hear shouting or that sort of stop going on in the background. An incident like that is immediate danger. That will, of course, even in pandemic times, that will have an urgent response, that will have an immediate response of police in attendance. And from that time, that police arrive with that victim, whoever they are, they will have somebody that will listen to what they want to tell us. We will have different mechanisms of hearing their account, whether that's through a video recorded interview, through a statement, through use of body-worn video, and trying to best support victims, because I recognise that whilst criminal justice outcomes may be something that I am trying to drive up, maybe something that I see as the outcome, it's not the outcome for every victim, and therefore it's really important that police are able to signpost victims appropriately for support, for family support with social services, and to that helpline information as well.
So when someone self-refers to their own, and when they refer through the police or people can attend as a self-referral, we will take forensic swabs to help identify the perpetrator and for use in the criminal justice system. And that in itself can be very empowering, because domestic violence is about power and control. And there's something very powerful about a woman or a man being able to say, you did this to me, you should not have done this to me, and I have got your forensics on the end of a swab. So that can help readdress the balance and can be very empowering, as well as stopping the perpetrators. Then on the health and therapeutic side, there are things that are important, like prevention of HIV and other sexually transmitted infection like hepatitis. And we follow people up at 2 weeks, 3 months, a year, or basically whenever they need seeing.
Soothing Breath is a digital booklet created by the Four Corners Festival in consultation with an art therapist. It provides soothing art, poetry, photography, and reflections, and it's freely available to download from the Four Corners website. To understand why the Four Corners Festival felt it was important this year to look at the issue of domestic abuse, I spoke to festival director Heather Palmer. I asked her what the festival wants to say to victims and survivors of domestic abuse, why they're highlighting this issue this year, and what they feel Jesus would say to those who are suffering.
We believe Jesus would say, you're not alone, you are loved, we are here to support, and what has happened to you or is happening to you is evil, and we support you in coming forward and giving you the strength to address where you are right now. The 4C directors and the clergy involved accept we are not experts in domestic abuse. However, what we can't do is ignore the fact that domestic abuse occurs and is occurring across our communities, including in faith-based settings. And it is so important that we bring this issue to the fore and to address perhaps where interpretations from a theological perspective have caused issue in relation to domestic abuse, and support how we actually continue to work and support our communities as a faith-based group. We are so sorry for the suffering that you have had. We want it to end. We want to help you to step out of a situation which you have found yourself in by no fault of your own, to get help, to receive the support, and also find yourself in that journey to a better place. We believe you, we stand with you, we support you, we pray for you, and we believe in this festival, in our faith, that hope is there and springs eternal. Grasp onto it and take the steps that will take you out of this domestic abuse situation that you find yourself to a safe harbour.
To help us understand domestic abuse in a theological perspective, I spoke to Denise Bradley from Coromila, who is leading their project on gender-based violence, religion, and domestic abuse. I started by asking her, what do religious organisations need to do?
So there's a real need for us to stop avoiding difficult texts, difficult conversations, because that just really colludes in with impunity and continues on then with the silencing of victims, because the guilt, the shame, the potential stigma that is attached around the experiences of domestic violence will prevent them from speaking out, and also prevent them from getting the support that they so need. Because many women within Christian communities do absorb much of that blame, much of that guilt, that they potentially are not being a good enough wife, that they potentially are not doing things the way that they should, or that they should be seeking continuously to forgive violence, and unfortunately that has dangerous consequences. We know still in the UK 2 women die at the hands of potentially former or current partners. So it is not issues that we can continue to avoid. When we start to explore stories such as the story of Hagar, with stories such as the story of Bathsheba, the story of Vashti, and the story of the woman who was nearly stoned in the New Testament with Jesus, this can start to begin to give women an understanding that it is not their fault. It is not their doing. These stories, I really believe, are there also to be explored through the lens of those who are marginalised, for those who are experiencing the oppression. And indeed, I suppose society's uncomfortability to discuss these issues is still very present, particularly within certain faith communities. And I think too often that the issues are sidestepped, particularly with these more difficult, complex texts. They're sidestepped in sermons and teachings, often in group studies, liturgies, prayers, and by doing this, we give little or no attention to the suffering and the pain that violence against women and girls still provides or still experience. The Bible is a book for all, and I really sense that much of the experience that I have is that women do not believe that it is relevant for them. When we start to shine a light and provide opportunities to explore these difficult issues, it gives people confidence. It provides people with language. It gives them a sense of renewed commitment and sometimes passion to begin to explore painful stories and sufferings that often surround us. And I think really whenever we move into the Gospels, when we move into the Gospels, Jesus challenges those harmful norms. We've seen a much different approach in Jesus's ministry. He challenged the harmful cultural norms. He challenged the religious hierarchies and the lower status of women by bringing them along on his ministry and into his friends' network. And I guess really even by the stories of thinking about who he did healing the lady with the menstrual issues, I suppose allowing the tears of the sex worker to I suppose anoint and was comfortable with that. He sat with the woman of Samaria at the well in scorching heat, going out of his way. So when we open ourselves up to the difficult pain, I think we can see, rather than avoid it, he opened a pathway to challenge the injustice and certainly provide opportunity for transformation. So it's vital that we engage with these texts. We cannot remain silent. If we remain silent, it does nothing more than to condone impunity. It conspires with the harmful myths that are within our society still today in 2021. So it's important that the cultural and society norms that are still within us, within our communities, within our congregations, do no longer remain unchallenged. We need to have new conversation and open new spaces to begin. One of the key barriers, I suppose, for those who are trying to survive domestic abuse or who are trying to seek support is often the silence that comes alongside that. It is so very, very important that we have a language, that we have a confidence to say, we believe you. I really sense today, if Christ was living amongst us, as indeed his scripture and his presence does, that he would be reaching out to women to say to them that it was not their doing, that it's not something that they deserve, and certainly that they, and his hope would that be that women can live free from abuse, free from the pain and the suffering of experiencing violence and abuse behind closed doors.
The church has a difficult relationship with victims of domestic abuse. It has both hidden and protected perpetrators. What does the church need to do to keep victims safe? Alan, I'll come to you.
Okay. I think first and foremost, we just have to recognise that we've been part of the problem as well. And I think we have to adopt a complete zero tolerance approach to any form of domestic abuse. And I think for me, I think what's just been said by Heather is that it's totally unacceptable and it's inconsistent with following Jesus Christ to say that abuse is part of life. And the church has covered this up in some ways by some people misinterpreting passages of scripture rather than the dignity of the person. I believe that the good news is about binding up the brokenhearted and setting free those who are captives. Jesus' programmatic statement in Luke chapter 4, it's about Jesus saying, lifting up the head of the downcast, that God sides with those who are oppressed. And that is the message of the good news, not the misappropriation of scriptures to cover up abuse or violence of any sort.
I would agree with that, Alan, thank you. And I think in a domestic violence relationship, nobody should ever be advised to stay.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's violence that ends relationships, not divorce. It's violence that ends it. It's important that they remain in control and aren't told when they should go. But if there are safeguarding concerns, churches and all of us should be reporting that to social services or police.
The only thing I was going to add was just around if we look to the ethos of onus and creating that safe place. I think the churches and our businesses and workplaces should all look to identify as a safe place to have a conversation, to start that conversation whenever someone is suffering from domestic abuse, domestic violence.
It's not easy to start a conversation that difficultly, but if you've built up a relationship with someone, you can begin to maybe open up. People are going to be a wee bit frightened to begin to just trust somebody they don't know. So they will speak to people maybe in a church community or local people where there is relationship built up. And then you can point them in the direction of MAP or Women's Aid or the PSNI. And we would have leaflets all in the area, in the church to give to people.
There are a number of incidents reported to police every year where a child has assaulted their parents, for example, and that is abuse that's happening in that domestic setting. It's not the typical go-to example of domestic abuse that we think of, but that is happening, whether that child is under 18 and is still a child, or whether they are a grown-up child of the parent. And there could be, again, any number of reasons that have started the aggressive and abusive behaviour. There could be so many different factors that will prevent parents, particularly, in reporting and seeking to prosecute their child, whether that's that they know that they have addiction issues or mental health problems, or there's so many different areas of concern in play whenever you're looking at that different portfolio, I suppose, of domestic abuse. And we do see that is a really difficult decision for a parent to make, whether or not that they want to see their child, whether they are adult or still a child, prosecuted and brought before the court for their actions.
Alan, if a child is exposed to domestic abuse, perhaps between their parents, but they aren't being physically harmed, are they being harmed because they're in an atmosphere of abuse?
Well, observation of violence is being modelled. It's going to be a noxious childhood experience, which will impact how they view the world and how they view themselves. It does have long-term implications, because even I work with adults over 18s, but more adults that I deal with in therapy, you know, there's the stuff that happens in your childhood obviously has an impact on your relationships, your interrelationships, how you cope with life. Yes, observational violence is a serious problem.
People quite often think that their children are not aware that the domestic violence is going on, but research has shown that 90% of children are aware, and 40 to 50% are directly affected by the abuse, as indeed also pets in the family can often be abused as well, as a way of getting at the person. So
just explain that a little bit more, Olive. Pets can be abused.
Yes, pets can be used in the same way as children can be used as weapons. Perpetrators can abuse family pets as a way of controlling the person that they're trying to control. There is a link between sexual violence, domestic violence, and cruelty to animals. That's well established.
Lindsay, is domestic abuse a crime? Can people be prosecuted for it?
Domestic abuse, I suppose, at the minute is the term that we use for various crimes set in a domestic setting. However, the domestic abuse bill, which will be coming in later this year, will create a standalone domestic abuse offence, and that will also have those child-related aggravators. But currently, in PSNI, in the domestic setting, we could be looking at offences of violence against the person, harassment, criminal damage, and all of those can be set in the domestic setting and will be termed within our statistics as domestic abuse crimes.
I think in terms of education, mutual respect is a wonderful thing. It's maybe sounds like a wee bit of a cliche in some ways, but giving dignity and treating people with respect, whatever their sex, orientation, gender, race, whatever it is. And I think that comes from all the sectors of society, whether it's through schools, through the churches, and through just the home itself.
Lindsay, how do we speak to young people and help them understand that violence or coercive control within a dating relationship isn't acceptable?
I think it's a really strong messaging that we need to get out in terms of education around those that are starting relationships, and to make sure that everybody is aware of mutual respect and understanding. There's no level of violence or controlling behaviour is acceptable in any relationship, whether this is a new or existing relationship. And I would like to encourage anyone who is in that relationship, in that type of relationship, to have the confidence to come forward and take that first step. But there's been no level of violence is acceptable in any domestic relationship.
As well, the understanding of a normal relationship, people do have disagreements, and some, it doesn't mean everything's going to run smoothly, but I think it's important that they understand the difference between, disagreements, mutual respect, and abuse, and consent as well. Particularly with regards to sexual relationships, consent should be freely given. With somebody who has the capacity to do so, and in fact the law requires this, and I think it's important as well that is a message for young people out there.
No, I totally agree, and I mean it's that consensual element and mutual respect. I think that's the key, and that's what we have to reinforce in society generally.
It shouldn't be happening to you, and you don't have to stay in an abusive relationship. And lift the phone and speak to someone, speak to the organisations that we that we have referred to. And research does show that people who get help earlier, that the outcome is better, for them and their children.
I would just plea that if even one person listening to this feels the strength to come forward and report to police, then I see that as a positive step.
If you or someone you know have been affected by the issues raised in this programme, there is help available. contact the 24-hour domestic and sexual abuse helpline. In an emergency where you need an immediate assistance or feel threatened, call the police on 999.
I would like to say to anybody who's suffering this that you are of tremendous worth and you are of tremendous value, and you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, and there is help and there is hope.
Times I inhale and believe it matters the most when I hold the weight of the world's expectations deep in the lungs of my soul, deeper beyond all desire, leaning on laughter and smile, free like the breath of the kestrel, carefully careless and wild. So breathe, breathe, breathe. Posture shifts its position, scented loses its smell, but stillness provokes expectation, and silence is more than I tell. Oh, resting from all of my striving, meeting with God on my knees, rising to face my ambitions, reminded that I should just breathe, 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 breathe. Breathe, breathe, breathe.